A bunch of people who came in and nobody was right. And then the second to last guy who came in was this weird looking guy. This is not weird looking guy. It's a completely normal looking guy. But he looked like a surfer. He was the furthest thing in the world from a Jew. But he was great. We knew 3 days in that he was a movie star.
Hello?
Daniel Balin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a reporter.
Reporter for who?
New York Times.
People hate Jews, do you agree? The very word makes their skin crawl. They undermine traditional life, and they deracinate society. You can take the greatest Jewish minds ever. Marx, Freud, Einstein. What have they given us? Communism, infantile sexuality, and the atom bomb.
Danny, this is great. But how can you believe all of this when you're a Jew yourself?
He's not Jewish at all, and then throughout the film, he would go on the most anti-Semitic tirades you've ever seen. Do you have a sense of how he looks back on the film?
Look, Hollywood is a frightening place to begin with. They're not looking for, I want to make this thing and I don't care what it's going to cost me. He probably can't make it. He probably couldn't make the movie, probably couldn't hire Ryan.
Did he have any concern for his career? Does he like it overall?
The guy is pretending to be a Nazi, but he's so Jewish it hurts. They condemned it. One of the things they condemned is probably, is your audience mostly Jewish? Are they going to care about this shit?
Would you feel it'd be responsible for yourself to make it today with a lot of lines in the film that play that tricky balance of sounding like conspiracy, but having kernels of truth in them?
It's not a crazy thing to think that oppression strengthened us.
This balance between self-love and self-hate. Do you think that has something to do with like the Talmud? Is it genetic? What we're seeing now from someone like Kanye West, the stuff he's saying, there are so many people who follow him and believe him. You literally feel like a Holocaust is possible in the USA? Okay, so today I have a very special guest on the show, writer, director Henry Bean. He made a film in 2001 called The Believer. It won Sundance back then, and it is about a Jewish neo-Nazi, and it's played by, the lead role of Danny is played by a little-known actor at the time by the name of Ryan Gosling. So, Henry, thank you for joining me on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Can you tell me, I know from, I guess, making my own controversial Jewish short film, how immersive it can be, and it was honestly tiring to kind of try to explore my own psyche. What made you want to make and invest your life at that time in a feature film, and particularly this story?
The film had a long gestation. It really began for me back in the 1970s when I met the now well-known New York journalist Mark Jacobson, who drew my attention to the story of Danny Burrows. Danny Burrows was a kid from Queens who got arrested at a Ku Klux Klan demonstration at a White Tower in the Bronx back in 1965. And somebody gave a tip to the New York Times that this kid who was going to come to trial was in fact a Jew, even though he was in the Ku Klux Klan or demonstrating with the Klan. And the New York Times sent a very interesting city desk reporter named McClandish Phillips out to interview Burrows. McClandish Phillips was widely regarded as the best writer on the New York Times city desk, and he was also a late evangelical minister. Not a combination you normally encounter, but he went out and found Burrows and took him to a coffee shop and had him talk about his ideas, his anti-Semitic ideas, which were, well elaborated and rather intellectual, but most I know about it. And then he said to him, listen, this is all very interesting, but how can you believe all this if you're a Jew? And the kid said, what are you talking about? I'm not a Jew. He said, well, I talked to Rabbi so-and-so at this, synagogue in Queens, and he bar mitzvahed you there, and whatever year it was, 61, earlier. And Burroughs said, if you print that in the New York Times, I'll kill myself. And Phillips, who later talked about this case, felt that he was with a lost soul. And the only thing he could do to save this lost soul was to attempt to convert him on the spot to Jesus Christ. And he tried that and it didn't work. So he then printed the story on Sunday. It came out Sunday in the New York Times, and Burroughs killed himself within an hour of seeing the paper. A horrible story. Burroughs, well, the Times got a lot of grief for this. The Times was called, you're a quote unquote Jewish paper. You should have understood that this kid was in danger. You shouldn't have printed the story. And so they sent two youngish people at the Times who would later go on to become big stars at the Times, Abe Rosenthal and Arthur Gelb, went out and wrote a book called One More Victim, I believe it's called, as in One More Victim of Hitler. And they went into the backstory of Danny Burroughs. It was basically the story of, a self-hating Jew. But what was interesting in it was that Burroughs was living among within the American Nazi Party, and he was, at one hand, hiding the fact that he was Jewish from his fellow Nazis, and at the other time, he was obviously giving it away. And he would say things to them like, you guys don't understand Judaism. You say you hate Judaism, but to understand Judaism, you have to really study it. And he would bring knishes back to the Nazi headquarters and say, you've got to eat this good Jew food. He was, and you can tell from the accounts of what happened in the immediate moments preceding his suicide, that all the Nazis knew he was Jewish. It was so obvious. He was making it obvious. And they tried to, Danny, we can talk about this. Don't go crazy. But he went crazy and killed himself. And the idea of somebody who was hiding something and compulsively giving it away at the same time was absolutely hypnotic to me. I thought, I love that story. I love that dilemma. But and Jacobson and I were both just conventional secular Jews. And it was a story about, in these early years of thinking about it, it was a story about our lives. We hadn't gone that far, but we understood where Danny Burroughs was coming from. Nobody wanted to be a Jew when we were kids, but we were stuck with it, and that was the story. But in the meantime, in the intervening years between the 70s when I first heard about the story and the 2000s or 90s really when I began to work on it, I married a woman who had gone to yeshivas and who, while not selling Judaism in any way to me, explained to me how little I knew about it. And I became interested in it. I began to, go to synagogue and get involved and, read the Torah a little bit and read the Midrash a little bit. And after a while, hold on a second. One day, I had a revelation. One day while with Jacobson talking about this story, I thought, what if Danny goes into a synagogue to trash the synagogue, and then when he confronts the Torah, can't bring himself to do it? What happens if Danny's Judaism returns to him? And what happens if he's tormented? He's no longer just an easy, simple, self-hating Jew. He's a self-hating Jew, and he's a Jewish Jew. That's what led me to the impossible character played by Ryan in the film, which is somebody who wants to be a Nazi and wants to be a rabbi at the same time. And it seemed to me, in my reform ignorance about things generally, it seemed to me that was somehow, that impossible dilemma, that paradoxical wish was very Jewish. That it was like an argument in the Talmud.
Yeah.
That it was this side and that side, and it's not about who's right and who's wrong, it's about the argument. The argument's what's interesting, not the conclusion of the argument. And I began to feel that there was a truth in this vision of the character. Somebody who, as we use that quote at the beginning from Catullus, from the Roman poet Catullus, I hate and I love, who can tell me why? That hatred and love were two sides. Love contained hatred inevitably. And only by showing the hatred he felt for his religion could he make his way, finally, to the love he felt for it. So everything changed. Everything about the kind of movie I was making shifted. And it became, for me, a kind of movie about my understanding of Judaism, an eccentric understanding, but I don't think entirely invented. I think some truthfulness to it. And it occurred to me while I was making the film that you could have a black version of this movie, or a Catholic version of this, or a gay version of this movie. The person who is the thing and hates the thing, and that's an inevitable part of being the thing. So
Yeah.
that's how it came. That's how I immersed myself in it, and I was immersed for several years.
I think that's why I related to it so much. Just a little bit of context about me, so we get to know each other a little better. I somehow stumbled upon this movie when I was a teenager. I'm 27 now. And at that time, I was never a neo-Nazi, but like I went to yeshiva for 18 years of my life. I always despised religion and Judaism because I had these authority figures at my school, these rabbis saying, don't do this, don't do that. And so the flashback scenes when it shows Danny as a kid, that was my life. It wasn't as black and white dress code. It was a more modern Orthodox, but that's what I related to. And now as I'm older, I appreciate Judaism more because, one, I see how much we're targeted, and how many people, even if I was an atheist, Hitler would kill me. And two, everyone wants everyone wants to feel like they belong. But I'm curious, because you described this a little, but what you showed in the film, his understanding of Talmud and these classroom teachings was so specific. It doesn't seem like the film would be made by someone like yourself, who is from a secular background. So how deeply did you get entrenched in, like, it seems like it would be made by someone like me, a teenager who came from that environment. How did you get, I guess, that fire of knowing what it feels like to be that kid?
Well, hatred and love, as I was saying a minute ago, hatred and love seem to me inseparable from each other. And when my wife, and through my wife, other people introduced me to Jewish thought, I won't say that I became adept at it or learned in it, but the passion of it was, I responded to that. Simone Weil, you know who I'm talking about? Simone Weil.
No, I don't know who that is.
Another complicated Jew. She said, everybody has a hunger. The only sin is to deny the hunger. And I found that I had hunger for this stuff. I probably read it pretty much in a literary way, but I had a hunger for it. So I don't really know much. I'm good at faking what I know because I'm a writer, and writers are good at that. But I do have a feeling for it. When I work in that medium, when I work in that subject, I have access to things that are I have access to my strength, I guess is what I say. So I became interested in it and had feeling for it, even though no, I don't know very much. I'm good at faking that I know very much, and so you think I knew it, but that's not right. But I get something about it. I get.
Yeah, I think what you really captured well was this idea that in order to, like, the essence of a true Jew is to critique oneself or to always question oneself. And that's another thing that I related to, is that when I got in these fights with teachers and people when I went to yeshiva, it's because I was trying to understand everything. And then vice versa on the other side, let's say I was talking to someone about Israel and I was making the case for Israel, I would always be like, well, you are blindly against Israel. So in a way, you crafted Danny to be someone who actually, he might not admit it to himself, but he understands what it means to be like a Talmudic Jew better than, his Jewish friends who bought into it, and better than the Nazis who claim they hate Jews.
I think there's something, I definitely buy the thing you're saying. I think that the outsider knows the inside in a way that the insider can never know it. They can see it for what it is, and they can see it for what it isn't. Somebody was telling me they were teaching classes, and they had Palestinian kids and Jewish kids, Israeli kids maybe, and they would fight about the politics of Israel and Palestine. And he said to them one day, okay, take the other side. Each of you take the other side. And he said they were brilliant at it. They could tell the other side better than they could tell their own side. That's something in that. We know what we disagree with in a way better than we know what. We're more engaged with it. We're fighting with it, and that fighting with it gives us an access to it. We're not just defending it, we're attacking it. Attacking the thing you attack, in a way the thing you're defending, you don't know. I don't know why that is, but it is.
Right. Before we get into some more themes, I want to ask about production and career-wise. You had written screenplays before this. How did you get into Hollywood, so to speak? And how did your career kind of, on a career level, lead up to this? And also, you could take this one by one, but also, how did Ryan Gosling fall into this project?
I was a screenwriter before I wrote The Believer, or I guess I'd imagined The Believer. I was already a professional screenwriter. I already had The Believer in my head in the old form I told you about. But I was working as a screenwriter, and I'd been working as a screenwriter for 20 years at least when this happened. So I was already involved in that, and I'd grown up watching movies and thinking about movies and wanting to make movies. And that was just part of my life. This came about because, as I say, sometime in the 90s, I had this sense. Mark and I had this idea for making this movie about the Danny Burrows story for 15, 20 years. But one day I had this idea about a different way of looking at it, more inside Judaism way of looking at it. And that excited me. And then a friend of ours, Mark's and mine, a guy named Johnny Buxbaum, who teaches film at Queen, or did, he just retired, was teaching film at Queens College, said to us, Mark and I had written other stuff together, and he said to us, give me some scenes from one of your scripts so that I can have my students shoot it. And we said, I'll tell you what, we'll give you scenes from a script we never wrote, that we always talked about writing. And I really wrote out a few of the scenes from The Believer and ended up directing his students in a little 13-minute sketch. And that was the beginning of the project. But I'd gotten into movies completely from another direction. I'd gotten into movies because I liked movies, and I'd had a career, and I went to Hollywood and got work there and developed, got a couple things made and got to have a reputation and got to be able to make some money. And so when I wanted to make The Believer, there were a couple of people who wanted to make it, and they wanted to give me the money for it for some reason, because everybody said, you'll never get that movie made. But in fact, it got attention. People with money wanted to give me money. But they also wanted to control the casting. This is going where you wanted to go. They wanted to control the casting, and they said, you got to use this actor, you got to use that actor, or why not about? And I couldn't find an actor I liked. It was hard. I couldn't find an actor I liked that seemed right to the character. And I threw away opportunities to make the movie. I threw away opportunities, and I said, I'm not doing it. And they said, if you don't do it with this actor, we're not going to give you the money. And I said, well, then I'm not doing it with you guys. Goodbye. And they said, somebody said to me at one point, you sure you want to make this movie? Because it sounds like you don't want to make it. And I thought, that's a reasonable thing to think. I'm vulnerable to that accusation. Maybe I don't want to make it. But now that I've said no to this money, and now that I've thrown away an opportunity, I feel like I've got an obligation to myself and the project and whatever it was to make it. So I got a job. I got a rewrite job where I got paid a lot of money. And I went to a friend of mine who was a producer, and I said, listen, I'm going to put in half the money. I'm going to put in $500,000 to this film. And you put in the other half and we'll make the movie. He said, okay. So I got this job, and I made an arrangement with my accountant whereby I could put the money in pre-tax. And I put in my $500,000 because I could make that money on a rewrite. And the producer put in his half, but it turned out he had to put in another $500,000, so we had $1.5 million on made it. And that's how it happened. But we didn't have an actor. I had the same problem I had with all the people who were going to give me the money. I didn't have an actor. And I saw hundreds of people in New York where I was going to make the movie. And then I went to LA and I saw hundreds of people. I was thinking, God, maybe this guy, maybe that guy, they're not so bad, but they didn't feel right. And we had 5 days of auditions in LA. And, you film these auditions, right? You videotape them. And then we had a bunch of people. So it's the sixth day. We didn't have the office we had for shooting them. So I did it in the apartment where I was staying, in my friend's house that I was staying in their apartment. And a bunch of people came in and nobody was right. And then the second to last guy who came in was this weird looking guy. This not weird looking guy. He was a completely normal looking guy. But he looked like a surfer. He had blonde hair sticking out from underneath a knit cap. And he was the furthest thing in the world from a Jew. But he was great. And he did these, when you do these auditions, you do the same scene over and over again, 2 or 3 scenes. And you see them 150, 200 times. You're sick of them. He did it, and it was new. It was fresh. It was different from everybody else. It had an authority. It had a life to it that was really exciting. I took the videotapes of that home to New York, and I showed it to my wife and to my friend who was going to become the costume designer of the film. I showed him 12 people, and they both picked him out. They both said, that guy. So I knew. And then I went to the producer and said, I have this unknown guy. He's unknown, but he's great. And the producer was sufficiently a very, very interesting, wonderful person, tricky person, but a guy named Peter Hoffman, not a Jew. And he looked at the videos and he said, I see why you want him. Okay. And that's how Ryan got the part. And then Ryan came to New York because he was living in LA, and he hung out. You remember the scene where he goes to synagogue and he meets the people he knew from yeshiva back when, and they're outside the synagogue. I think it's on Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
And they get into an argument about Israel. Mm-hmm. There's a short, dark, aggressive guy. His real name was Judah Lazarus. And he was really my model. He was the guy who played Danny in that little sketch I made. And I said to Ryan, you hang out with Judah. And Ryan is a sponge. Was a sponge then? I don't know. He was a sponge. He just soaked it up. He got the speech rhythms. He got the gestures. He got the attitude. He's a brilliant kid. Ryan Gosling is a brilliant guy. He never had an education of a normal sort, but he's very, very smart. And he picked it up. And he was authentic. And yeshiva bookers would say of his performance, oh, well, obviously he went to yeshiva. But in fact, he didn't. Or anything like it.
Yeah, he grew up.
So that's how Ryan got in it.
He grew up Mormon, right?
He grew up Mormon, but he wasn't. He grew up Mormon, but his parents, I think, were of Irish Catholic stock. They were Irish Catholics who would become Mormons, and so Ryan grew up as a Mormon. Yeah, that's right. And he was very much a Mormon when he was making the film. He would never touch, but he had this kind of Talmudic mind. So he would say, well, Joseph Smith says no alcohol and no coffee or tea for caffeine, but he doesn't say anything about Coke. And it's true, Coke has caffeine, but I'm not. If he didn't say anything against Coke, I'm not keeping Coke off my. I mean, it's really the way somebody who some yeshiva book or wants to argue with the halakha would be, or if he was an idiot like me. And that was and Ryan would if he was doing if he was doing a scene where he had to be profane, say fucking kikes or whatever else he had to say, he would apologize in advance to everybody in the crew and everybody in the cast that he was going to have to say these bad words. And then when the take came, he would say them with complete relish and joy. Very impressive. He was an impressive guy. We knew 3 days in that he was a movie star. And we had a movie star in our hands that nobody knew about. We knew about it, and nobody else. I mean, not nobody, but you know what I mean? The world didn't know. It was quite exciting.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. I truly believe that he played it aside from not looking super Jewish, he played it better than probably any Jewish actor I can think of. The way he talked, he's from Canada, but for some reason has like a New York accent.
That's Judah Lazarus. That is Ryan channeling Judah Lazarus' speech manual.
Yeah. And it's such a...
he's a musician. He's got a fantastic ear.
It's such a controversial film compared to other stuff he's done. Like before that, he was in the Mickey Mouse Club. Following that, he's done, The Notebook, La La Land. Did you have a sense of...
Well, he's done some tougher films. He did Half Nelson. He did other films that were demanding. He didn't just do easy films.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking more in like the respect that I guess the fangirls think of him like kind of the mass audience that he might get marketed as.
Yeah.
Did you sense any conflict? Because he's not Jewish at all. And then throughout the film, like you're saying, he would just go on more, the most anti-Semitic tirades you've ever seen. Besides on set, like, do you have a sense of how he looks back on the film or how he felt about it after? Did he have any concern for his career? Does he like it overall?
I think he likes it very much. I think a lot of people will say to him, well, that's the best thing or one of the best things you've done. I know that before he took the role, he was worried, would it be a bad influence on him? Who is the actor who plays the love interest in Erin Brockovich?
Julia Roberts?
No, Julia Roberts is the woman. Who's the man?
Oh.
Well, whoever it is, it's a young leading man type who I think is also Mormon. And Ryan apparently went to him. I can't remember the guy's name because I'm old and I can't remember. But Ryan went to him and said, "What do you think?" And the guy said to him, "I don't know about this, but what do you think? I like the part." The guy said to him, "If you like the part, if it's exciting to you, then do it." And he did it. So he didn't come to me with misgivings. He didn't say, "I'm not so sure about this." But apparently he had them, at least to some extent. I think he looks back on it as a great experience. I mean, it made him a star. You play a villain, really not a villain, but you play the bad guy. That's a ticket. If you've got something, that's a good role to launch your career.
And, is there a reason you didn't, you said you knew you had a star on your hands, a few days in. Is there a reason you didn't try to like further the professional relationship and make more films with him? Because, he's blown up so big. And you did? Yeah, we did. We tried a couple things, and one thing almost worked and it didn't work. And when I made Noise, I imagined a middle-aged man, and Ryan read the script and said, "I want to do it." And so I tried to get it off with Ryan and couldn't. And then by the time I had the money, he was gone. And I had Tim, and I thought Tim was great. So, but we did try. Gotcha.
And by that point, I think he was too big. He was getting, he was working with Dennis, Denny who did Bill in a Wave and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And when an actor gets that big, are they not as inclined to take kind of these more indie projects?
I think Ryan, if he got the right indie project, would take it always, because I think what he really wants to do, unless I don't know what his financial life is like. I don't know how much money he needs, so forth. But I would think he would always be tempted by a good role.
Similarly, on the topic of someone like him doing that film, do you think you could get the film made today? And do you think it would be, you'd be able to cast a non-Jewish actor in that role today? Because there's so many more rules in Hollywood now about who can play what and all this sort of stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, didn't somebody give the woman who plays Mrs. Maisel? I don't know. I've never seen the show, but isn't she not a Jew? And wasn't there certain criticism of the show for casting a non-Jew in that Jewish show? I don't know what could happen today. The rules today are so exacting and so irrational and so seemingly designed by the devil. You probably can't make it. Probably couldn't make the movie. Probably couldn't hire Ryan. I don't know. Yes, I think it would be very hard. Well, look, the world seemed very safe when I made that film. And the year 2000 was the year the film went into production, and 9/11 hadn't happened, and the world seemed as safe and sane and peaceful and prosperous as at least the part of the world we lived in it could be. So it was possible to do that. I think after 9/11 it would have been harder, and today it would be impossible. But I'm glad we got to make it.
Let's say you had the ability to, right? You owned a studio or whatever. Would you feel would you feel it'd be responsible for yourself to make it today with like everything we're seeing in the news with, let's say, Kanye West and all that?
Look, I made that film as a mockery of anti-Semitism. I made it to be funny. The secret thing that I was unable to pull off because I wasn't a good enough filmmaker was I saw that as basically a comedy. And the guy is pretending to be a Nazi, but he's so Jewish it hurts. And Ryan got that. Ryan got that joke so well, so deeply. So I would delight in making it about contemporary anti-Semitism. I'd have to redo it and rethink it. Kanye West and Steve Bannon and whoever else you've got to deal with. I think that could be done, but it's a different movie. This movie occurred at a different moment in history. Yeah, sure, you can make it today with Kanye West. You know, when what's his name, Dave Chappelle goes on Saturday Night Live and makes fun of Kanye West for his anti-Semitism. You know, it's a black guy making fun of a black guy, but it works. It completely works.
Yeah.
And I think it can work. I think these prejudices are crazy. They're all crazy. And so, yes, you can make fun of them. You can depict them. You can make them look stupid. You can make them look evil, ridiculous, whatever you want. You can do it. But people are frightened. Look, Hollywood is a frightened place to begin with. Even before all the Me Too stuff and the woke stuff, Hollywood was a terribly frightened place. It's a place of people who are just afraid of getting something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard culture in which to make something interesting.
And it seems like
they're looking for what might be they're looking for what might be the trigger to their problems and come back to bite them. They're not looking for, I want to make this thing and I don't care what it's going to cost me in reputation or money. I'm going to make it because that's who I am. Well, that kind of spirit, which is what we like to think of as the spirit of Hollywood, is not really there. Maybe it was never there. There were guys like that, but they were always a minority.
Right.
Guys, and they were mostly guys in the old days.
And I think one of the problems today is films, you know, how they're perceived. It's not so much about what the actual content of the film is, but it's what makes the headline. So if you were to make The Believer today, I could see a lot of people saying, you know, Ryan Gosling does anti-Semitic film. Obviously, if you watch the film and you understand it, you see that it's so obviously critiquing anti-Semitism. But on that note, how was the film received at the time? Like, what percentage were people like myself who fully got it, people who embraced it for the wrong reasons, and people who criticized it for misunderstanding it?
There's always, with anything that people watch, there's a wide range of responses. And, there were people within the traditional Jewish community who got it completely and understood what it was up to. And there were people within that community who thought it was a shad and a charpa. And I came a cropper. I might have had a theatrical release, but I came a cropper of the Simon Wiesenthal Institute, you know, the Museum of Tolerance in LA, which has nothing to do with Simon Wiesenthal. And they did that organization saw itself, I think, or it seemed to me, as a kind of pope of Jewish stuff in Hollywood. And I had neglected, not because I was bad, just because I didn't think that I had to do it. I had neglected to go and kiss the ring explain what I was doing and explain why it was really right. And maybe if I'd done that, everything would have been fine. But I hadn't done it. And so when the film won Sundance and Paramount, I don't know if it's called Paramount Classics, but one of the a low budget distribution wing of Paramount was thinking of buying it. They needed somebody to bless it or fail to bless it, and I very naively, I should have taken it to B'nai B'rith, or I should have taken it to this guy or that guy, but I took it to the Simon Wiesenthal Institute, and they condemned it. And one of the things they condemned is your audience mostly Jewish? Are they going to care about this shit? One of the things they condemned about it. Okay, well, one of the things they condemned about it was we dropped the Torah on the floor. You remember in the synagogue scene, we drop a Torah on the floor. It's a very big moment. Danny's horrified. And a rabbi who spoke for the Institute said, they dropped a Torah on the floor. Nobody came to me and found out that we had particularly we knew this was a problem, and we got the stick, the 8 seam, the sticks, the Torah's scroll is wrapped around. We got them before they'd been blessed. We got the 3 panels or 2 panels of Torah script that do not contain the name of God, and we reprinted them and put them on a big scroll. So what we dropped was not a desecration. But nobody asked me. They just assumed, oh, you dropped the Torah. You're an apostate. You're an apikoros or whatever they call you. And they didn't want to, and also there's a line in there about Jewish women like to give head. Well, there were Jewish women who saw it at the screening for the Simon Wiesenthal, and they didn't like that line. I thought that line was actually a compliment to Jewish women, but okay, they didn't like it. And that was another problem. So we were never going to, that was a loser from the start. That was never going to work out. And if I'd understood, if I'd been savvy in any way, I would never have shown it to those guys. I would never have given them the opportunity to pass judgment on it. I would have tried to find some other Jewish organization that was more amenable to pass judgment, and maybe it would have made a difference. I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't have. People are, as I say, people in Hollywood are afraid. They're really, really afraid. You know what people in Hollywood are about? They're about holding on to their jobs. So if you could perhaps make the next Star Wars, but if it didn't work, you'd lose a lot of money and have egg on your face. They'd rather make a safe movie that isn't going to be the next Star Wars and isn't going to lose a lot of money, and they're going to keep their job.
Jewish girls love to give head. Right?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. Is that right?
And Jewish men love to get it.
Everybody likes to get it.
Yes, it's very pleasurable, but Jews are obsessed with it. You want to know why?
Yes, why?
Because a Jew's essentially female.
Female.
Now, the Jew says all he wants is to be left alone to study his Torah, do a little business, fornicate with his oversexed wife, but it's not true. He wants to be hated. He longs for our scorn. He clings to it as if it were the very core of his being. If Hitler had not existed, the Jews would have invented him. For without such hatred, the so-called chosen people would vanish from the earth.
In the film, Danny says a lot of anti-Semitic stuff, but stuff, when not in a hateful context, has a lot of truth behind it. You know, basically that like Jews don't have a soil, that they're constantly, wandering, that, a lot of these stereotypes are true. So, why do you think that those things, continue to be true of Jews?
I mean, why do the old stereotypes still obtain? Jews don't have a soil, even though there's now a Jewish nation, a Jewish state.
I guess
I don't know. Do they continue? Do those things continue?
I guess what I mean is
the anti-Semitism continues.
Right. The anti-Semitism continues, but I'm trying to think of specific circumstances, but throughout the film, I feel like Danny says one of the best scenes in the film, in my opinion, is the Shema Yisrael speech about how he says we have to love the Jews because the only way, Jews thrive off of conflict. And someone might look at that and, think that's crazy. But for me, that's something I don't know why, but I inherently understand. I feel like my mental issues, my thirst for conflict, yes, people have that who are not Jewish, but it feels intrinsically tied to my Judaism. So do you think that has something to do with like the Talmud? Is it genetic? Why do a lot of Jews kind of have
the sense of the Jewish love of conflict, the Jewish sense of thriving on enmity?
Yeah.
Well, I don't. It's a big question. Look, there's a history of it, right? There's a history in which there's been oppression, and the people have survived despite the oppression, and some people would say because of the oppression. And we feel it's not a crazy thing to think that maybe the oppression strengthened us, bound us to each other, forced us out of normal professions, out of normal dead-end jobs into entrepreneurial jobs where you could make more money, forced us into culture where there was less prejudice and certain richness, cultural richness was developed, and skills of thinking were developed. I don't think it's far-fetched to think that. I think every people who's oppressed is strengthened by it. They may not all be strengthened the way we are. They may not all, sort of become prosperous and triumphant, but I think they're strengthened by it. I think Black people are strengthened by the oppression they experience. It expresses itself, the strength expresses itself in a different way. And I'm really, now I'm going to get myself in real trouble because I can speak about Jews, but I'm not allowed to speak about Blacks. Maybe I can't even speak about Jews. I suspect that Black people are strengthened by it in a deep spiritual way. And that's real. But none of my business. I withdraw my remarks.
I mean, it goes back to that line in the film that Danny says, if Hitler didn't exist, the Jews would have invented him.
Right.
And there are a lot
He's a binding force, right?
Yeah. There are a lot of lines in the film that play that tricky balance of sounding like conspiracies, but having kernels of truth in them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was going for. I wanted the thing filled with those little things, little koans of, wow, wait a second, does that make sense? That's paradoxical. Does that make sense? Is that real? There's something real there, but it sounds ridiculous. I like that. I like that experience.
Right. And do you feel like Jews, this inner conflict, like this balance between self-love and self-hate, do you sense that this is something that Jews experience more than other religions or groups?
Well, I said to you back at the beginning of this conversation that I thought you could have made a Black version or a gay version or this version or that version of the same movie with that group's self-love and self-hatred tangled together. I think there's something dialectical in the Jewish thought, and that maybe that leads in this direction, but I don't know that it's any different from any other people. Once you have a sense of yourself as a group, there's a natural tendency to have both a tremendous loyalty to that group and an enmity of that group. And you don't know how to put them together. You don't want to be ghettoized. When I was a kid, Mark Jacobson and I were talking about, the reason Mark Jacobson and I didn't want to be Jewish is because we didn't want to be ghettoized. We didn't want to be Jews. We wanted to be Americans. It seemed, why do I have to have this special designation? I want to be a person like anybody else. Same thing, Herzl was thinking of. But as you get older, maybe you think, I don't mind that designation. I don't mind belonging to that group. Mm-hmm. I don't have many group loyalties, but the ones I have are important to me. They're real.
Yeah.
I belong to the Jews and to the writers. Those are the groups I belong to.
Something that makes me feel that, yes, I've read a lot of the reviews of the film. Obviously, people from many different religions watch it and say, wow, what a great universal story about a crisis of faith. Crisis of faith is a universal term. Right. But something, and I'm curious if you could comment on this, that I feel is particular to Judaism, right? The lack of soil described. Also, we don't have a heaven. And there's this term used throughout the film about nothingness, and then the film ends with Danny, the young Danny, running up the steps, and the steps never end. So, do you feel like there is a stronger lack of a sense of belonging in Judaism because of those tenets?
I think that people feel the belonging in Judaism. You mean belonging to, not to the soil, but to the Ha'am, to the people, or belonging to the sacred writings, to the Torah. Mm-hmm. That's a very strong belief. It isn't soil. This is why some people will tell you the Jews are a postmodern people, because the diaspora forced us into abstraction. It forced us into other ways of identifying. But I think that the Jews I know, now look, there are lots of Jews who feel that connection less and less and drift away and so forth. But the Jews I know, it's a very big part of people's lives. Most people, not all of them. I mean, I know a lot of people, but there's a strong bond to the people. There's a strong bond to the tribe, to the law, to a certain way of thinking, to a history.
And of course, with
all these things are very powerful.
With Israel, you could argue there's a craving for a land, right?
Yeah, I certainly the people who are the strong Zionists have a strong feeling about that. And when I've been in Israel, which isn't much, you feel it. It's not something I feel that strongly. I feel much more attachment to the land of the United States. Not because I think it's better, just because it was imbued in me when I was a kid, and I grew up feeling attachment to this place. It's why the last few years have been very difficult.
Why is that? The last few years?
Because I feel that there's been a deterioration of that belief, and many people have implicitly or explicitly renounced their commitment to the sacred writings of this nation. You know, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and that all of that, which to me was very much you could say a secular religion. That was a secular religion when I grew up. That meant enormous amount to my parents, especially my father. And when you see people questioning the elections, in a sense, really questioning democracy itself, you think, well, the things that seem so fundamental to me are things they really want to get rid of. I don't know why. I don't know what they want to, or what they're going to have in its place. But they don't love it. I thought we all loved it, even if we disagreed about this or that. We all loved it. You know, not every single last one of us, but the country as a whole loved it. But it's not true. No longer true.
Right.
It's been extremely painful.
Right now,
there's nothing to do with Jews.
Yeah. Right now, there seems to be a lack of trust of authority, right? We don't trust experts or historians. Everyone gets their information from social media, so we're filled with disinformation. And this is, like, to bring things back to what we're seeing now from someone like Kanye West, the stuff he's saying, it sounds crazy, but if you spend a lot of time on social media like I do, on Twitter and the YouTube comments, there are so many people who follow him and believe him. Believe the stuff he's saying. So with that sort of framework, do you think something like the Holocaust or is possible anytime soon? You know, like when you combine, let's say, a president or someone who wants to overthrow the Constitution and basically establish a monarchy or, an authoritarian state, and then you also have the disinformation on the internet. Do you think that could add up to something truly threatening, or is this kind of nothing new for you, what you're seeing, the rhetoric you're seeing?
No, I think it's scary, and I think it would take external circumstances. If you had terrible economic conditions and people were out of work and hungry and losing their homes, in significant numbers, I think that could create a situation in which this might catch fire. I think that with inflation decreasing, with the workforce largely employed with Biden or the current circumstances moderating that stuff, it becomes a little bit less likely. But no, it's possible. It's always possible. It's always possible. It's always there.
So you literally feel like a Holocaust is possible in the USA?
I think a Holocaust of some kind is possible almost everywhere, almost always. I don't want to say that, but I think the United States is a very febrile country. Not a calm, not that we're not the Brits, even if we come from the Brits. And the Brits themselves are not so calm anymore. But yes, I think the United States could blow up. I have felt since the Obama election, when everybody went crazy over the idea, not everybody, but there was a madness over the idea that, my God, we have a black president. I felt the country is so angry that it can't come back to normal. It's like it has to have a fever. It has to have a fever. The fever has to go crazy. There has to be bloodshed, and then maybe it can calm down. Now, I confess that in the last couple months, it's felt calmer. But that depends on external circumstance. The economy is under control more. The economy is sort of under control. I think the economy is a big part of it. I think if people's lives are basically okay, there are not likely to be enough people to go out and destroy the thing. There are people who want chaos because they want chaos because that's their inner need. But I think that if things are basically working, that's unlikely to sway everyone. But if things are basically not working, then Sam Bankman-Fried's collapse could swing things a different way. And to say, another Jew who built people out of billions.
Yeah, another good. Bernie Madoff.
Yeah, the nice thing about Fried and Bankman-Fried and Madoff is basically it was rich people who lost their money. That's okay. I mean, that's not okay.
Often rich Jews.
That's better than poor people losing their money. Well, rich Jews, whatever. But you don't want poor people losing their money. Rich people can lose some money and they'll still be okay. But if things get bad for the poor, you got a much more dangerous situation, a much more awful situation.
Yeah. So
I think the erosion of the American middle class has been a terrible thing for the Jews. For everybody and for the Jews. For everybody, including the rich. The rich do not benefit from the erosion of the middle class and their own super wealthdom. They don't benefit from that. They think they do, but they're wrong.
Speaking of super wealth, did you ever have any aspirations to be like, a top of the top director who's directing $100 million movies in Hollywood? Like, what were your aspirations throughout your career, and like what sort of work have you been doing since The Believer?
I've had a less active career since The Believer. I think that one of the things that happens when you do something like that is, prior to that, I was seen as a reasonably employable writer. I think when you do that, they say, "Oh, he's not a writer. He's full of shit. He's not going to be a serious writer because that's not what he's interested in. He'll just do it for the money." So I think that hurts a little bit. I'm older, so that hurts a little bit too, or maybe even a lot. I never wanted to be an A-list director. I avoided chances to direct before I made The Believer. Not great chances, but there were avenues I could have gone down that might well have led to my directing. And I think I was diffident about it. I didn't really want to direct. And I don't like directing. I think of myself as a writer, and that's what I am. And I had to direct The Believer because it was the most interesting thing I had written. And if I didn't direct it, the film was never going to get made. And it had to get made. I felt that. This was something I had to say, and saying it in private and the script in my desk drawer wasn't going to be sufficient. But I never wanted to make a lot of money. I wanted to have money. I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to be respected. I'm petty and competitive like everybody else. But I passed up opportunities to make more money. not because I was too good for it, because I had other. I had, what is it? What is it? Dick Cheney said. I had other priorities. I had things I wanted to make. I had things I wanted to write. I had, if you said to me, you can make $100 million or you can make a masterpiece, but you'll make nothing and you'll lose money on it, I wouldn't hesitate for half a second. I would take the masterpiece, because the masterpiece is, you make a lot of money, you spend the money, or the money doesn't make you happy. A masterpiece, or even the non-masterpieces I have made, the little bits and pieces of good stuff and the things I've done, those keep me warm all the time. I'm taking endless pleasure from them. The money I made, meaningless. It's useful. It's not unuseful. I'm glad to have made it. But it's not deeply gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
The believer is deeply gratifying. However crudely, I said what I wanted to say there, and I said it. And some people dig it. And that's all I ask.
And how would you say The Believer fits into your life and career? Like, right, when people look back at Paul McCartney's career, he has a lot of great solo stuff, but he has the Beatles, right? So when you look back, is that your thing? Or
I don't have the Beatles, no. No, do I look back and think that's the masterpiece of my work? No, I don't think that. I think that was a good thing I did, and stuff I've done since in prose fiction is better, and it's not as well known, but I don't care. No, I don't see it that way. I think the believer is right at the heart of what I want to do. What I want to do, and I didn't set out to do this. I can just see from looking at my work. What I like to do is I like to take a character you don't want to like and make you like him anyway. That's something I want to do. And the believer does that, and a number of things I've written do that. And that's my métier. But I just want to follow my instincts. I want to follow my ideas. The stuff I write changes. I wrote a story that has a story that I think is the best thing I've ever written. It has a Jewish content that I can't get published. I've published other work, but I can't get this published, even though it seems to be the best thing I've done. But I'm delighted with it. I love it. It makes me happy. It warms my heart.
So these days you're doing more literary work?
No, I'm trying to sell a television series, and I'm writing a screenplay, and I'm doing literary work. Yeah, I do all of that. But I write.
And what would your advice be to someone like myself? Let's say I just want to make a feature film, right? And I have a big idea, but I don't want to wait 20 years to get funding from a studio. Like, what is your advice to,
is it when you say it's a big idea, does it require a big budget?
What I mean by big idea is like it's big to you, right? You didn't want to make this.
You love it.
You love it and you want it to be perfect.
If you can do it for nothing, if you can do it for a little bit of money, if it's the kind of idea that can be done for a little bit of money, try and raise the money. Try and make yourself a 10, 15-minute short version of it. So have you directed stuff?
Yeah, I actually sent you something I directed, like shorts.
Oh yeah. Then I'd say try to raise the money and make it. Just make it. Just make it. And do it however you can for as little money as you can make it plausible. So it has to be, you have to evaluate the script to know what level of production design, what level of location or stunts or size of cast, or quality of costumes, all that stuff. You have to evaluate what level you absolutely need and what level you don't. How much do they make Blair Witch for? They made Blair Witch for $20,000 or $50,000. That's a good movie to my mind. But you can't do a thriller that requires car chases and gunfighting and fancy residences for that kind of money. Or maybe you can, and then you're a brilliant person. But it's a question. It really is a question. If you can imagine doing it yourself with your friends, with people you round up, then I would say do it. If you can't, then think about what you have to do to get it done.
How do you slip into the industry? Like even before The Believer, when you were writing screenplays, like how did you get your in?
Well, I started there in the late 70s, and the place was much more open than it is today. And as somebody said to me when they returned a phone call that I couldn't believe, I said, "Why did you return my phone call?" He said, "Because I don't know that in 6 months I won't want you to return my phone call." Things were that like that. So I came in and I wrote some scripts. I wrote a script by myself. I wrote a script with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And people liked them and got attention and hired me to do other things and hired us to do other things and so forth. And we made our way. I suspect it's harder than that today, but I bet it's basically that. It may be what's harder today is to get somebody to read your script and get the person who might make a decision about it to read it. But that I assume that can be done because I know that Hollywood is always looking for new talent, and they're always looking for new talent partly because you gotta find some new talent to keep the thing going, but also because new talent tends to be cheap. The established talent costs too much to hire, but if they can find somebody young with a different vision and not expensive, they want that person. So there's a market for those things. People still start careers. Get yourself, try and get yourself a gig as a writing intern in a writer's room, and maybe somewhere along the way somebody will let you write a scene or two. if they write a scene or two that they like, then maybe they'll let you write a whole episode, something like that. Mm-hmm. Not what I had to do, but
right. So you feel things are it's more saturated today. Things are more closed off a bit.
There are more people crowded at the entrance door, at the entrance gates. You know what I mean? It's more crowded and everything's rationalized. It was a looser, more open world, and what you were allowed to write was looser and more open. Maybe I don't know.
Do you still
television's pretty free?
Do you still go to the movies?
Well, I do a lot of streaming. I still go to the movies, but mostly I watch on streaming. I've been watching the foreign films because I'm on the Academy Foreign Film Jury. So I had to watch a certain number of foreign films and then vote for them and so forth. And that was interesting. And the foreign films are more adventuresome by and large, I think, than their American equivalents.
Right. I don't think we have time to talk about your other film, Noise, but I will say that I'm someone who's extremely noise sensitive, and it's one of the main reasons I left New York City, and I found it so funny that, for those watching who don't know, the film is basically about someone who gets sick of car alarms going outside and goes and breaks the car alarms, and apparently the film's based on yourself. So my question is, why do you still live in New York City?
I love it. There's a vitality here that I appreciate and I don't find elsewhere. I mean, maybe there are all sorts of. I like Chicago. I like LA in this way, but New York is my idea of a city, and I love being here. And I get stimulated by the streets. I get stimulated by the mentality of the people. It's a comfortable place for me. Not easy to live, but comfortable.
So
I feel at home. I feel at home here.
So it's worth it for you despite the noise.
Yeah, it's worth it for me despite the noise.
Okay. And lastly, what do you want to be remembered for?
Stuff I've written. I want people to read the stuff I've written and say, "Wow, that was good." That's all. I want my family to remember me as a person, but that's different. My friends, that's different.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to keep writing. I want to keep writing and learn how to finish things.
Do you not finish things a lot?
I have trouble finishing things. It's hard. And jobs I can finish. So somebody hires me for a job, I can finish it. But the stuff I invent on my own, tends to keep evolving for me and hard to wrestle it to the ground.
Is it hard for you to sit down and write? Like, do you enjoy writing, or is it a chore?
Yeah. No, it's not hard for me to sit down and write. I enjoy writing very much. Almost every day, as I settle into the work I'm actually doing, I feel a mixture of joy and relief, and I'm happy to be there. I'm grateful that I get to do it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that's the best.
I'll take that as inspiration for myself, because I'm not consistent enough. But anyway, I appreciate you speaking with me. You know, we're over the hour, so yeah, thank you so much. It's been I've wanted to pick your brain for a long time, so I appreciate you coming on.
All right, thank you. Good conversation. It's fun talking.
Yes.